Hello everyone, my name is Adam Winnik and I am an art director and animator at Café, and we are responsible for creating the animations for YouTube's GEM crash course. And today we're going to be looking into how we built episode 16 for the mythology series. We're going to go shot by shot and figure out how we did things and why we did them. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the flood scene, where the assets were made in Adobe Illustrator and animated in After Effects 2018. Here's what the final will look like. Looks pretty sweet. And right over here is the project panel, and we'll do a Command I for the shortcut to import and select import as from footage to composition, retain layer sizes. And the reason for that is when you import as footage, it becomes a flat image versus a layered file, which you can manipulate and animate accordingly. And if we were to import it as composition, that would make it to the size of the artboard, but we're not going to do that today. Now that it's all loaded, let's jump into the comp by double clicking. So if you right click here, you can see composition settings. You got the name, you got the dimensions, duration. We've got some different codecs here, but we're just going to keep it simple. We're going to name it here. You can change the size. It's all very useful. These different settings have different reasons, so like broadcast may be different, but this is for the internet, so we're going to keep it the way it is. And we're going to create a null here to parent all the layers to. And there's many ways to set up a scene, such as with a camera, or you got some fake parallax using nulls, which is how we're going to do it today. And there's various reasons for doing it this way, but since we're working with larger layers and we have quick turnarounds, we sometimes use a null system versus a camera system. So we'll jump back to our main timeline and drop that scene back in place. We'll change the color, which is very useful for organizing content and for different organizing. So to do some quick editing, you can do command left and right brackets, square brackets rather, to do various cut points depending on where your timeline scrub is. So we'll duplicate the source footage so that we can get some audio for the scene that we're animating. We'll do Command X to cut the layer, and we'll plop it into the comp that we're animating with Command V. So Command X here, double click there, and then Command V. And since we made a previous cut in the main timeline comp, we will use left square bracket to align it to where our footage begins, which will be placed wherever the timeline scrubber is. With animation and motion graphics, timing is usually everything, and a great way to improve your timing is using markers. So if you click on if we go in here and if you hold shift and pick a number, you can actually add markers just like that. And then if you double click on the markers themselves, you'll see an additional dialog box that helps you kind of plan what those markers mean. You can rename them. It's a pretty powerful tool. And command click to get rid of notes. So right now we're just gonna start colorizing some of the layers just to organize without doing any pre-comps. I'll change that here. change those colors here. So the similar properties there are clouds. We're just going to speed through this part because this part's boring. So here you can see we got a lot of animals and characters here, which are just placeholders for now. So what we'll do is we'll swap out the placement with the real comps, which have already been animated since it has been previously created. So we're just going to replace. So we'll just give a quick tint just so that placement is as accurate as possible. We can choose a different color here. Doesn't really matter, but we'll choose this. This looks good. So then we'll go back into the project panel. We'll find the animated comps and just replace them one by one. Now it's important to remember that when you are replacing comps, they have to be the exact same size, otherwise you're going to get some distortion of placement, and that's just the way that the center point acts and the way that it sees the new comp being. So we'll do this several times. You resize it, scale it, change the position, and we'll just place it here, rinse and repeat. Animation is a time-consuming process, so we'll just speed it through. So this is what all the comps look like replaced, and it's looking pretty good. And we'll jump into a comp, and we'll see that this horse has some wiggles going on, and it's basically just script-based animating, which is an effective way to animate background type of content while making it look alive. So in the annotation, the boat layers, the boat deck layers kind of come up one by one. And it's actually one layer. So in this instance, you need to do some stitch work. And we'll just duplicate it multiple times and mask out each one. Now, if you want to avoid this process, you go into the Illustrator file and you could add the layers. You could add the 5 layers that you need for each deck layer, but we'll just do it with the mask since it's a quick movement anyway. It's not going to be too crazy, so we'll just do the 5 and build it that way. So here we got some easing tools from Motion 2 plugin, which is very useful. Highly recommend it. And we're going to shift the anchor point of all the decks here so that when we move, we're moving from that reference point. So if we do a rotation on that anchor point, it will rotate from the bottom and center instead of the center, which does end up actually making quite a difference in the way things are animated. And the next step that we're going to do is pre-comping, which is arguably the most important thing to understand in After Effects. It's the idea of having a group that has its own animated data set and can be further animated once you pre-comp it. So you can layer effects, layer position changes, rotations, things like that. Basically, you collapse and group these layers so that you can focus on the limited selection versus having multiple layers at once like we are in this current comp. Just naming the layers is also very important so that you can keep a organizational hierarchy of what's actually going on, because it does get confusing and you actually need to be quite smart to animate and do motion graphics. It's confusing stuff. Even if it looks simple, it's kind of tricky. So once you kind of get a few pre-comps going, you basically have the building blocks of a scene. We'll jump back to the null, and we'll figure out how we're going to structure this so that the null, we have a main null and all of these minor nulls in which we can create a sense of parallax, which is just a fancy word for having depth and motion that gives the optical illusion of depth. So we'll create a main null with a few smaller nulls for the layers of the trees and the backgrounds and the sky and things like that. And like I said earlier, you can create, like After Effects does have the ability to have 2.5D camera rigs and have this type of motion automatic, but in this instance we're going to use nulls just to create a faster render, and using a null actually does give you there are some benefits to it. So we got our midground, background, foreground nulls set up, and basically the midground will move a little bit, foreground will move more, and the background will move less because it's further away, thus creating the illusion of parallax. First thing we're going to do for this scene is the zoom. We'll just punch in that, get that framed. It's looking good. So the scale and position are being manipulated on all three of the main controller nulls. So to give things a nice kind of fidelity, we're going to select all the keyframes here of position and scale. We'll just do an F9 easy ease, so it eases in and eases out. And what that does is smooth the speed of inward and outward motion. So this is kind of looking cool already. So we got this. We're going to add a adjustment layer. And adjustment layers are an effect layer that affects anything below it. And the effect that we're going to add is a Gaussian blur. And that will create a sort of depth of field effect, which will give it a cinematic feel. Yeah, that's looking nice. So once we got the zoom in laid in, we will do the zoom out by copying the frames and reversing the order. And we did that using the plugin, Motion 2 plugin, which is great. But it's something that you can do without the plugin as well. So next here, we're going to drop those decks of the boat onto the main part of the boat. So when you're doing some placement, it kind of helps to think in reverse. So when you copy or paste something, it may have the position of where you want it to end versus where you want it to start. So you'll just place that ahead of time, and then you can do the movement after. So you have that reference point. Now we can animate it falling in. We'll just crank that up so it's out of frame and dropping into frame like that. So we're going to change the anchor points here like we did earlier, but since it got pre-comped, it has to be redone, as each effect is handled differently when it isn't pre-comp. So we'll just shift this one similar to what we did earlier. Slide this one over there. Get the top guys right there. We'll do a solo. There we go. This is closer to what we want since our anchor points were on the wrong spot, which is why we redid it. So here we're gonna do the famous squash and stretch technique that animation has used for ages. This is just kind of like the motion graphics version of it. And the reason why you do this is just to give it life and gives it character, kind of a fun cartoony feel. So we'll do a nice system of scaling up and scaling down, and then having each iteration of it lessen as time goes on, and this creates the effect that it looks like it's sort of made out of jello or something. Yeah, it's just a fun way to do it. That looks pretty good. So what we're going to do here is we're going to copy the scale parameter and apply it to each of the layers, and then offset it. And that'll create a nice kind of like, I want to say like pancake stack effect, where all the effects are slightly offset by one frame or so, and that'll create the look and feel of it all interacting with each other. And we're also going to do some parenting. I'm just going to tweak the layers so that they affect each other by parenting them. So we're going to do something similar that we did earlier. We're going to make 2 keyframes, and that's just a quick way to do a reference point to where the art has been placed without losing the initial starting point. We're just going to slide it up here, and boom, I got that. So similar to the boat docks, or sorry, the boat decks rather, we're going to offset them to create that pancake style again, but just a few keyframes using the sequence layers function. And as you can see, we're just speeding through this. It'll create that slight offset and kind of creates a more wavy type of feel to the transition. So this is looking pretty good. Now we're just going to jump in to each of these layers and add the details, the characters, and the animals. And as you can see, I'm jumping back and forth to the main comp, and you can see how all the layers are working together now. And using this type of offset, you can see this type of there's a type of motion that's almost like you're climbing the stairs as the camera's moving, and that's a good use of motion design and using all the tools available to make something interesting. And up next, we're going to add some previously made storm clouds, and we can just check the project panel here. It's as easy as clicking and dragging in, and it is a pre-comp, so if we do need to go edit what's inside, we can just double click and expand it that way. Lots of good stuff here, exactly what we're looking for. We'll just delete these markers here. And we're going to attach the storm clouds that we just brought in and attach them to the background null. And that'll just, that'll glue that type of movement to that background null there. We're just going to add some movement, simple movement to the clouds to give it a little bit of layering and some parallax effect. Make it look like there's some wind in the distance. Just livens up the scene a bit. So these plain clouds are just going to fade out and transition to the storm clouds. And we're just going to do that with a simple opacity fade, 100 to 0, and for the storm clouds, 0 to 100. We're just going to resize our storm clouds here. They're slightly too big. We'll just go inside the comp, see what's up. Let's solo it so we can look at exactly what we're looking at. We'll do a scale inside this comp as well. That's looking pretty good. Up next, we'll make a shine for the boat when Mike mentions the boat. It's a good way to draw your eye towards a specific part of a scene. So we'll make a shape layer rectangle and use this as a way to mask out the boat. We'll set a position keyframe and drag it over the timeline. And we'll add an easy ease on that just to make it seem nice and smooth. We'll duplicate the boat and use that as an alpha matte, and using the shape layer as the moving mask asset, which we will make to additive and lower the opacity as it passes by. We also will add a nice bulge here just to give a little bit of a dimension. It's the small things that sell an effect often, so it's amazing what your eye can pick up. All right, this is looking good. Next, we're gonna add one of my favorite effects. It is the dust effect, and I think it's one of the most used assets in the Crash Course series. So we'll just drop a few of those in and see how that adds some texture to it. We'll just search in our project panel, click and drag the comp in, and we'll just shift it on the time scale, shift around some scale values to fit the proportions of the boat. It's a pretty simple asset. It's only 2 different layers. The opacity fades from 100 to 0, and it also has I think it was a fast blur at the time. A fast blur increases over time as the opacity drops and as the scaling of the layers scale up. It becomes thinner and more smoky. It's a good effect. We'll just make this one a little softer, add more blur. So similar process to how we've been doing this sort of offset sequenced layer effect. Now we're going to offset all the corresponding dust layers so that it matches with each of the boat's layers. That's looking pretty cool. Pretty happy with that. All right, we're gonna add some rain next, and we can do that by adding a new solid, which is Command Y. And the dimensions are whatever your comp's dimensions are, so it fits perfectly, which is good. So in this instance, we're going to use the pre-made effect, the simulation effect of rainfall. And this is just a great way to do kind of, templated type of effects. And while maintaining control and having the creative levers in front of you. And then after that, we'll attach it to the midground null, and that'll cement it to the to that plane. For these waves, we're just going to attach it to the foreground null and duplicate that wave. Just give it a little layering. We'll reduce the number of drops and increase the size. And then we'll also add a Gaussian blur to give it more of a foreground feel. So similar to what we did for rain, we're going to use the pre-made asset. Command Y for the new shape, or new solid rather, and we'll search the advanced lightning effect, and it's pretty cool. It's just a great way to build a scene on the fly when time is an important resource. Just gotta move it around, and gotta play with some of the settings to make it feel like it's in the scene, and that's all done by parenting to the right null and giving the sensation that it's, you know, a stormy cloud in the distance. And here we're just going to tweak the settings a bit. We'll make it a very short animation, and we'll add a flicker there, just so we get the variation and make it look alive. We'll make this look more lightning-like when we duplicate it. And we're adding a Gaussian blur here on an additive layer mode. And this will just give that nice glow, that godly glow of lightning. Looks pretty good. Of course, there's many ways to do these things. Everyone kind of has their own cheats and tricks, but this is just the way we like to do it. And let's add some more lightning on the other side there. Same process as last time, just duplicate it, additive. We'll add a little blur and make it look more powerful, more magical. And up next here, we're just going to add some flashes of the lightning. And that just kind of helps sell the effect of lightning and thunder and the storm clouds. And it'll be a simple effect. It'll be just a white solid on additive layer mode, and we're just going to have a simple opacity shift to 0 from around 12. Yeah, that's looking good. Just adds that atmospheric glow to everything. It ties it all together. Probably one of the best things about animation is you can see the scene come to life step by step, and it's just a very fun and interesting thing to partake in. So one thing that helps build some good artistic direction is the way that light interacts in the world, and you can kind of create these lighting systems using tints for each of the layers, and you can see that, like, realistically, if the whole scene was purple, that purple would be reflecting in the plants and in the grass, and so we need to color correct that to make it look like it's part of the same world and not some sort of isolated asset that isn't interacting with the light bouncing around. We're just using tint, and we're using an eyedropper of whatever types of purple are in the sky, and you can see how it already starts to settle into a scene, and it feels more believable. Even though it's cartoony, it feels more believable. So one of the things we're going to add here is a wiggle null to the main camera null. And the best way to do that is with a slider controller and a wiggle expression. So what we'll do is we'll type in the expression and drag the wiggle expression into the slider so that we can have a changing value to the wiggle as needed. So we can kind of create something as if it's landing or shaking for a short amount of time to go back to zero value. Just building up some more of that rain and duplicating that, offsetting it, creating a new sort of depth pass to it to create that stormy weather. And then in addition to that, we'll add a rotation null, and this will just help sell the effect of the wave cascading over the camera, and just having a little bit of a Dutch tilt to the shot. And the nice thing about creating separate nulls for these types of moments is that you can have a hierarchy of animated parameters that don't necessarily affect each other because they're null based, and if they're not parented to the master nulls, they won't be affected. But it just gives you some more freedom and having a non-permanent way to animate. So on the final pass here, we can look at the main comp, see how it plays out. We can just double check some of these comps to make sure that we have everything where it needs to be. Yep, and here's one of the pre-animated comps, and we'll just properly null parent it to the null that is the foreground layer. Just a quick little preview of where we've gone. It's looking pretty promising. And throwing in the last characters here, we're just dragging and dropping some of the pre-made assets and finding out when their cues happen. Here we are with the characters. Got the waves coming in. Got that little bit of wiggle. The Dutch tilts. Yeah, it's looking good. All right, and we'll just do a nice HD preview here. Got the pancake stack, you got the offset, you got the sequenced layers, you got the easy ease, you got some simple character cues, some nice pre-made effects layered to add some more atmosphere. We got tints. We got wiggles. And it's just, I think what's important is that like all these small little details, especially for motion graphics, they all add up, and you can create a lot of beautiful images and visuals with these simple techniques. Even though they're simple, they are mighty in numbers. Yeah, it's looking good. Thanks for listening on the crash course of Crash Course. See you next time.